his major achievement is to keep the Chinese economic growth story, and I guess to be fair, also the Chinese rejuvenation, and the rejuvenation of Chinese civilization story going, even though the challenges have become much stronger for China, both domestically, internally, and externally. So externally, as you know, as I document in my book, as China won, the US has launched a major geopolitical contest against China, starting soon after Trump became president. And internally, he's had to overcome many big challenges like, growing corruption, factionalism in the party. And he's been riding a very wild horse for over the last 9 years, and kept it going at a steady pace. Mao Zedong inherited a China that had been completely broken and shattered by the West in the century of humiliation from 1842 to 1949. So the great strength of Mao Zedong was to pick up a broken China and make it, as he says, stand up again. And that was a phenomenal achievement, by the way. I mean, he had lots of flaws, made lots of mistakes, but you can't deny him the reality that he picked up a broken China and he made it strong again. I think President Xi Jinping has inherited a much stronger China, from his predecessors, from Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. So his achievements are different from those of Mao Zedong. But, there are also significant achievements because, China went through all kinds of different challenges. And as I said, he's kept China going despite these phenomenal challenges.
So for Xi Jinping, and I think his most important contribution to the party itself is that he became a strong leader. So he could offer coherence and also rendering punishment and some serious punishment to discipline the party and to create a more, coherent organization. So I think this is his most important contribution to the party. And also you think about the people, and especially the middle class or upper middle class people living in major cities, and I mean the cities like the provincial capitals and above. And so they are protected and given privileges under the hukou residential registration system. So this group of people, I think they are very happy.
I would say the major mistake that China has made, I guess during his time also, has been, number one, to alienate the American business community, which used to be the number one supporter of close relations between US and China. And unfortunately, when President Trump launched his trade war against China, none of the American businessmen spoke out as they should have or could have, and said to moderate this contest that the US had launched against China.
So that's why I think the economy is not doing well. Now we are talking about some 70 countries that participated in the BRI. But you can see in the year 2020, China already frozen the debt service. It means did not push them to pay back the debts, right? And his relationship with the minorities, with the periphery areas, right? If you look at Xinjiang, if you look at Tibet, right? If you look at Hong Kong, right? So he used, you see, his tough policy and to silence and all these areas. I do not think and he is a strategist, or he has a sensible strategy. And based upon my understanding and my careful reading and his policy and his writings and his behavior, and also based upon my understanding of human history of politics, right? And so I think that he is another utopian Don Quixote style politician, right? So, and I think that he is ambitious, but I think that he is arrogant, and he is not, you see, really clear understanding about what he's really doing. To some extent, I can say, and he's more delusional.
The record of history shows that if you have good, strong leaders, and if they stay in office a longer period, they have more time to consolidate and to strengthen their achievements. And so the length, I think it's a mistake to focus on length. You should focus on the substance and content of his leadership, and to ask whether or not his leadership has strengthened has overall strengthened China or weakened China. And most Chinese are of the view that his leadership has strengthened China, not weakened China. And so the term limits were removed, but there are many leaders who have been in office for longer period, and that's not abnormal, like Chancellor Angela Merkel, like Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore.
So in Chinese politics, I think it is full of predictable events and uncertainties, we can say, and he has created a lot of troubles. Even you compare him with Deng Xiaoping, right, with Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. And so it means the Chinese Communist Party, their fundamental principle, so-called democratic centralism, and has been replaced by this personal dictatorship. Right? I think this is something very dangerous, right?
Well, I think it reflects a very sad insularity of the Western mind, because the Western mind has got used to functioning in a mono-civilizational world where only one set of values and norms were dominant, which are the Western values and norms. So the West assumed that, as Francis Fukuyama said in his essay, The End of History, we have reached the end of history and all societies have become replicas of the West. And of course, as I've argued in my book, Has China Won and Has the West Lost It, that essay did a lot of brain damage to the West because it put the West to sleep at precisely the moment when other Asian societies like China and India were returning. And it was an incredibly arrogant assumption on the part of the West to believe that all the new societies that were going to re-emerge would become carbon copies or replicas of the West. And China clearly has got its own 4,000 years of political tradition, political history, political culture. And in the Chinese political tradition, when they have a strong ruler who delivers concrete benefits to the Chinese people, he's considered the best ruler for China. So, and the reality is that, as a Harvard Kennedy School has documented, the support for the Chinese Communist Party has gone up from 86% in 2003 to 93% in 2016. This is a Harvard Kennedy School study. So how do you explain the fact that the Chinese government is actually more popular than it has ever been. And it's natural because the Chinese people have enjoyed a very good time. So it's important, therefore, for the West to stop being so narrow, close-minded, and insular, and understand that when China succeeds and does well, it will not function according to the Western model. And as long as China doesn't try to export its model to other countries, and China isn't trying to do that, by the way, then the West should accept the reality that China will be China, and the West can remain Western, and the two can live in peace with each other.
So actually, this facade is very fragile. If we try to poke upon it, we can easily poke holes, right? And so now, if the Chinese regime has only one voice and do not allow other people to have plural opinions, so I think it can be easy for them to say, look, we have all the supporters. If they are scared, they are not going to tell you the truth. But if you gave them the freedom to choose, and so the dictators, and they are going to have difficulty and to survive. If the Chinese Communist Party is enjoying legitimacy, enjoys regime legitimacy, and so why China is the People's Republic of China, which has never allowed a national free election.
I speak as a friend of Australia, and I think one question Australians should ask themselves is the Australian relationship with China the norm, or is Australian-China relationship the aberration? And, Australia is geographically located in Asia, not in Europe or in North America. But quite often, Australia behaves as though it is a European country or a North American country and not as an Asian country. So, I wrote a 5,000-word essay for the Australian National University called Australia's Destiny in the Asian Century. So the question is whether or not the Asian century will adjust to Australia, or will Australia adjust to the Asian century? So I think it's very unwise of Australia not to realize that you are now dealing with a very different world, not the world that Australia knew in the 19th century and 20th century. The 19th century and 20th century saw 200 years of Western domination of world history, which was a major historical aberration. Now, it was a historical aberration because from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. So in the 21st century, what you're seeing is the return of the Asian century. And since Asia is geographically since Australia is geographically part of Asia, I think it's important for Australia to psychologically understand that it's got to make adjustments and adaptations to survive and do well in this century. So, and I think it's somewhat unwise of Australia not to realize this and not to realize that it is in its interest to make adjustments and adaptations, because you have 25 million people in Australia, you have 650 million people in Southeast Asia. Many of the people in Southeast Asia share the same apprehensions of China that Australia has, but you learn how to live and adapt to a stronger and more powerful China. So for a start, you don't publicly insult China. But if Australia chooses to publicly insult China, you have to accept that there will be consequences that flow as a result. And I think it's very unwise that there are no voices in Australia that actually argue for a wiser course of action for Australia. And I think if you're a friend of Australia and you see Australia walking towards a cliff, you either say keep on walking, or you say stop and reconsider your course. And as a friend of Australia, I say Australia has got to make psychological adjustments and adaptations to an Asian century. And the sooner it does it, the better it will be for Australia.
Xi Jinping has already gone into fanaticism, and because he has overused his power, it means he is wasting his power. And so you only have sycophants surrounding you. So eventually you don't even have authentic information. So you destroy your own information flow and your information system. So this is how I think, and when Xi Jinping has this overconfidence, then he can challenge the West. I think he does not understand. He cannot. Why? Because China, as I said, for the past 40 years, because China's participation in the production chain, right? So China made some profits. But the production chain, and you can find, and they are dominated by three important factors. One is technology. Who controls the technology? Of course, the United States and the Western countries. And so this is no doubt about it. And then the second is capital. And who is it controls the capital? And of course, the Western capital market and the Wall Street, right? And so, and this hundreds of years and the development, right, in capitalist system. And then who controls brand name? And so, of course, the Western brand names, they have much higher value and the intangible value, right, than the Chinese brand names. And then you are going to ask who is it controls the biggest market? Of course, the U.S. market is the biggest market. And the Western countries, they have the biggest market. Not only they have the biggest market, and also they have the most high quality market.